Everyone keeps asking how this happened so fast. The honest answer is that it didn't. What we're witnessing now has been building quietly for years. The only thing that truly changed this week is that the people who usually control the narrative finally lost control of the price. And when that happens, history tells us exactly what comes next. They don't admit defeat. They don't allow honest price discovery. They pull levers. They change rules. That is precisely what unfolded today. While most traders were glued to their screens watching silver surge toward the mid-80s, something far more important was happening behind the curtain. Not on a chart, not on social media, but deep inside the machinery of the financial system itself. Early this morning, the CME group quietly released an emergency advisory, Notice 2609. To a casual observer, it looked like another dry procedural update, the kind nobody bothers to read. To anyone who understands market structure, it was a flare shot straight into the sky. Effective immediately, the CME altered how margin requirements are calculated for precious metals. They abandoned fixed dollar margins and moved to a percentage of notional value. For silver, that percentage was set at 9%. On the surface, that sounds harmless. Technical, even reasonable. Until you do the math. With silver trading around $85 an ounce, the cost to hold a single futures contract jumped roughly 15% overnight. Margin requirements surged from about $32,500 to more than $38,000 per contract. Nearly $6,000 due immediately. That is not a tweak. That is a shot across the bow. So why now? Because yesterday, silver didn't just rise. It went vertical. The price gapped from the low 80s straight through 85 and briefly touched $86 during the electronic session. For the commercial banks sitting on massive paper short positions, that move wasn't uncomfortable. It was existential. Another few dollars higher, and margin calls wouldn't just increase, they would cascade. Losses would compound. Liquidity would evaporate. The system needed buying pressure to stop immediately. And when you can't stop demand, you attack leverage. This is how exchanges force the issue. Every trader using borrowed money is suddenly presented with a very simple choice. Wire in thousands of dollars in fresh cash right now, or we liquidate your position for you. It's not subtle. It's not market-driven. It's a liquidity drain by design. We've seen this movie before. The same playbook was used in 2011. The same playbook was used again in 2020. Different year, same reflex. For a brief moment, it looked like the tactic worked. If you were watching short-term charts, you saw it happen in real time. The instant the margin news hit trading terminals, silver dropped hard, from $86 down into the low $83 range. Those red candles weren't emotion. They weren't fundamentals. They were algorithms and forced liquidations reacting to a rule change. That was leverage being flushed out of the system on command. By tonight, the headlines will tell you the rally is over. They'll point to that candle and say the market has spoken. They'll say the bubble popped. They'll want you scared enough to dump physical metal because a screen price flickered red for a few minutes. But here's the part they don't want you focusing on. Look at what happened next. In 2011, margin hikes crushed silver. 5 increases in 1 week sent the price down nearly 30%. Silver collapsed from $50 to $35 in days. It was brutal and decisive. Today, we got a single margin hike of roughly 15%, punitive by any standard. And what happened? Silver dropped about $2.50. That's it. And even that drop didn't stick. Price dipped into the low 83s and was immediately bought. As of this recording, silver is holding right around $83. It refused to roll over. That matters more than any headline ever will. This was the system firing one of its most powerful weapons directly at the market, and the market barely flinched. That is not weakness, that is strength. The reason this time is different has nothing to do with charts. The buyers sitting at $83 are not speculators. They are not day traders chasing momentum with leverage. They are industrial consumers, sovereign entities, and large-scale buyers paying cash. You can't margin call someone who wires the full amount. If a manufacturer needs silver for electronics, batteries, solar panels, or defense systems, CME margin policy is irrelevant. They're not gambling on futures contracts. They're securing supply. When price drops, they don't panic. They smile and buy more. That's why margin hikes don't stop physical demand. In fact, they often strengthen it. They shake out weak hands and deliver cheaper metal directly to the strongest buyers in the world. The paper longs get punished. The physical longs get rewarded. 2 markets, 1 ticker. Completely different realities. This is the clearest confirmation yet that silver has split into 2 separate systems. One is the paper market, leveraged, rule-driven, and constantly adjusted to protect insiders. The other is the physical market, governed by scarcity, logistics, and real-world necessity. You can manipulate one for a while. You cannot manipulate both indefinitely. And if the margin hike was the financial panic response, what happened next was the political one. While the CME was rewriting the rules of its casino, the U.S. Treasury was doing something far more alarming, asking for help. Multiple reports now confirm that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent convened an urgent, unscheduled meeting with G7 finance ministers. Officially, the topic was securing and diversifying supply chains. That phrase should make your ears ring. Government's done to call emergency meetings in the middle of a price spike unless something is already broken. This wasn't about climate goals or long-term planning. It wasn't scheduled weeks in advance. The timing tells you everything. Silver spikes, Asian premiums explode, inventories vanish, and suddenly, the world's most powerful financial bloc is scrambling to talk about supply chains. When officials say they need to secure supply, it means the flow has stopped. When they say diversify, it means they are dangerously dependent on countries they don't control. Diplomatic language is polite by design, but once you learn how to read it, it becomes brutally honest. Silver production and refining are not evenly distributed. China is a top producer and the dominant refiner. Russia is a major supplier. Mexico and Peru are critical sources. These are not jurisdictions the G7 can simply command. And when physical silver disappears, no amount of financial engineering can conjure it back into existence. The margin hike was meant to buy time. The G7 meeting tells you they know time is running out. This is what systemic stress looks like. Not a crash, not a screaming headline, but emergency meetings, rule changes, and quiet admissions hidden behind bureaucratic language. They can change the rules of the paper game. They can force liquidations. They can lean on price for a day or two. What they cannot do is print silver. And they cannot force cash buyers to stop buying something they desperately need. If today felt chaotic, good. Chaos is honest. It's what happens when a tightly controlled system starts losing its grip. The most important takeaway isn't that silver dipped. It's that the strongest weapons they have no longer work the way they used to. And once that realization spreads, the next phase doesn't need leverage at all. If you step back and look at the board the way policymakers do, the picture becomes uncomfortably clear. The balance of power in silver is no longer theoretical, it's geographical. A massive share of global supply, refining, and downstream control now sits outside the Western financial system. And today, the G7 quietly admitted they are no longer in charge of the flow. Western finance ministers weren't staring at charts for entertainment. They were watching metal physically disappear. Shanghai was pulling silver out of London and New York like a vacuum cleaner with the bag removed. Retail demand was emptying U.S. mints faster than they could restock. And at some point during that meeting, an uncomfortable realization set in. The West has no buffer left. The United States sold its strategic silver stockpile decades ago. Not trimmed it, sold it. There is no emergency vault waiting to be opened. The entire system runs on just-in-time delivery. That philosophy works beautifully, right up until the moment it doesn't. Just-in-time is finished. The world has shifted to just-in-case, and the United States suddenly realized it has no case at all. This panic didn't appear out of nowhere. It connects directly to events earlier this month that many people misunderstood. Think back to early January and what was branded as Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. You were told it was about democracy. You were told it was about stability. It was about resources. Oil then, metals now. Same behavior, different input. When an empire starts moving aggressively to secure raw materials, it's not confidence, it's scarcity anxiety. 10 days later, that same anxiety has migrated into the metals market. Silver is no longer just an investment problem. It's an operational problem. You cannot run a modern military, build a green energy grid, and maintain a digital economy without enormous quantities of silver. This isn't optional. Modern warfare is electronic. Every missile guidance system, fighter jet, drone swarm, and satellite constellation depends on silver's unmatched conductivity. There is no substitute that performs the same job at the same scale. If the supply chain snaps, and dealer delays suggest it already has, the military-industrial complex doesn't slow down. It stops. That's why the Treasury Secretary is personally involved. This isn't about coins or collectibles. This is about national security. Viewed through that lens, today's coordinated response makes perfect sense. First, the financial arm moves. The CME raises margins to smash the paper price and flush out leveraged participants. It doesn't fix the shortage, but it buys time. Then the political arm steps in. The Treasury convenes the G7 to coordinate how to secure physical metal outside the open market. This is no longer free market capitalism. This is cartel behavior. They want to coordinate with allies, Europe, Japan, Canada, to lock down mining output in friendly jurisdictions before China absorbs it all. And the irony is painful. China has been doing exactly this for years. While the West optimized ESG scores and invented derivatives, China signed long-term offtake agreements and invested directly in refining capacity. They weren't speculating on silver. They were securing it. That's why today's G7 meeting isn't a display of strength. It's an admission of weakness. If they already controlled supply, they wouldn't need to meet. If the market were functioning normally, none of this would be happening. There would be no emergency coordination, no closed-door meetings, no sudden rule changes. The timing alone tells you everything you need to know. Silver spikes, and suddenly the highest levels of government are scrambling to secure it. That $86 price was not a bubble. It was a flare. And flares are not meant to last. They are meant to signal distress. Pay close attention to the language shift now taking place. For decades, silver was dismissed as a shiny rock, a barbarous relic, something for jewelry, coins, and hobbyists. Overnight, that narrative has been quietly abandoned. Silver has been reclassified as a critical mineral. That designation is not accidental. Once an asset is labeled critical, it becomes eligible for direct government intervention. It opens the door to the Defense Production Act. It allows authorities to prioritize industrial and military allocation over private ownership. And yes, it lays the groundwork for rationing. If a defense contractor needs silver for missile guidance systems, and a tech giant needs it for batteries, and you want it to protect your purchasing power, guess who wins that conversation? Missiles and batteries, every time. That is the uncomfortable direction this is heading. The public is not invited to scarcity management meetings. The public gets managed. You are already seeing the early signs. Purchase limits, premium spikes, sudden shortages at major retailers, a growing narrative about hoarders and fair distribution. This is not about fairness, it's about control. They want the metal and they would prefer you didn't have it. That's why a $2 paper drop caused by a margin hike should not discourage you. It should clarify things. The same institutions leaning on the price are simultaneously holding emergency meetings to figure out how to obtain the very asset they are trying to make look weak. That contradiction tells you everything. The margin hike was the distraction. The G7 meeting was the confession. And this is not happening in isolation. Bond markets are already flashing warning signs, as seen in recent sovereign debt moves out of India. Now commodities are joining the rebellion. Policymakers are fighting a two-front war against economic gravity. And gravity has a long track record of winning. Here's the part that really matters. None of these tools create supply. Paper tricks do not dig mines. Diplomatic meetings do not refine ore. You cannot legislate a silver deposit into existence. From discovery to production, a new mine takes close to a decade. No communique, no emergency session, no strongly worded statement changes that. You can hear the frustration in the system's response. The financial tools are blunt, the political tools are slow, and the market is moving faster than both. Which brings us to the most important question of the day. Why didn't it work? History says margin hikes break markets. In 2011, they crushed silver. In 2020, they amplified the pandemic crash and drove prices into the teens. When the cost of leverage rises, players are supposed to fold. That's the script. But today, the players didn't fold, they called. Silver dipped into the low $83 range and bounced. It absorbed the blow and stood there, stubborn and uncooperative, like a heavyweight who just took a clean shot and smiled back. That should not have happened unless something fundamental has changed. It has, and it's roughly 7,000 miles east. While New York was busy selling paper, the Shanghai Gold Exchange fixed silver above 93. That is nearly a $10 spread between east and west. In previous cycles, that gap did not exist. In 2011, prices across major exchanges moved together. The market was unified. When New York sold, everyone sold. That world is gone. The market is fractured. The West trades promises. The East trades metal. And as long as Shanghai is willing to pay over $90, there is a hard floor under the Western price. Not because of sentiment, but because of arbitrage physics. If the CME somehow smashed silver to $70 while Shanghai stayed at $93, that would not end the bull market. It would turbocharge it. A $23 arbitrage spread is a gift. Traders wouldn't panic. They would back up trucks. Metal would flow east at record speed. COMEX inventories would be drained in days, not months. That is the Shanghai Shield. It's not a theory. It's a pressure valve that turns Western manipulation into Eastern accumulation. The harder the West pushes the price down, the faster physical supply disappears. This is why today's interventions failed, and why the next ones will fail too. The door isn't just closing, it's already off the hinges. The system knows it, the G7 knows it, the CME knows it. The only remaining question is whether you are watching this unfold in panic or preparation. At this point, the irony is almost painful to watch. The banks are trapped in a position entirely of their own making, and there is no elegant exit. Every move they consider comes with a cost they can no longer afford. If they smash the paper price, physical metal disappears into Asia at a discount. If they allow the price to rise, their short positions bleed into outright insolvency. They are no longer managing a market. They are choosing which limb to sacrifice. And the data released today confirms exactly which choice they're making. While screens were flashing red and commentators were celebrating a so-called price reset, something very different was happening behind the scenes. The vaults were being emptied, not figuratively, literally. The depository statistics published today read like an inventory report from a besieged city. Over 500,000 ounces removed from one vault, more than 600,000 ounces withdrawn from another, hundreds of thousands more from multiple facilities. In total, more than 2.2 million ounces of silver left the system in a single day. That alone would be notable. But the real tell is where the damage occurred. The registered category, the silver available for immediate delivery, fell sharply. That is the bloodstream. That is the metal that actually matters. And it is leaking. The margin hike did not stop the bleed. It accelerated it by forcing the paper price down into the low 80s. The exchange unintentionally put silver on sale for the very entities draining the vaults. They tried to starve demand and ended up feeding it. That is not strategy. That is self-harm. This ties directly back to the emergency conversations happening at the G7 level. Treasury officials do not need charts to understand what is going on. They see the same inventory reports. They know metal is flowing west to east at an accelerating pace. That is why the language coming out of those meetings revolves around securing supply chains. They are trying to build a fence around a market that already has a 10 price gap in it. And here's the problem with fences. Capital doesn't respect them. Metal doesn't either. It flows to where it is valued most. Right now, that place is Shanghai. This is why volatility should not scare you. When you see a sharp red candle, understand what it is actually hitting. There's a floor under this market, and it is not made of sentiment or technical indicators. It is made of a standing bid from the largest industrial economy on Earth. Unless the price in China collapses, and there is zero evidence of that given domestic demand, the price in New York cannot fall meaningfully without triggering massive arbitrage flows. In effect, arbitrage now acts like a built-in put option. Downside is capped by physics. Upside is open-ended because the short structure is broken. That asymmetry did not exist in previous cycles. What we are witnessing is the fragmentation of global price discovery. For over a century, New York dictated the price of silver and the rest of the world followed. That era is ending in real time. Today, Shanghai sets the floor, and New York scrambles to defend relevance. The margin hike was an attempt to remind the market who was in charge. The market checked the Shanghai fix and collectively realized the emperor was underdressed. Paper tools only work when physical demand is dormant. That condition no longer exists. The physical market is awake, aggressive, and consuming inventory at a pace the paper system cannot replenish. The metal leaving the vaults today is not coming back. It will not be rehypothecated. It will not reappear as eligible inventory. It is being melted, fabricated, installed, and deployed. Solar panels, electronics, defense systems, end of story. So now we reach the uncomfortable question for the establishment. What's left? Margins didn't crash the price. Policy meetings didn't stop the outflow. Supply cannot be conjured. The only remaining lever is access. If you can't control price and you can't increase supply, you restrict participation. You make it harder for the public to get involved, and we are now watching that phase begin. Look at retail. For years, major retailers quietly became some of the largest silver distributors in the country. Easy access, high trust. That model just changed. Strict limits, hard caps, one transaction per membership. In a free market, businesses do not limit sales when demand surges. They only do that when they fear they cannot replace what they are selling. That is rationing, quiet, polite rationing. Now look at the U.S. Mint. Official silver coinage released and immediately backordered. Delays announced. The government cannot stamp enough coins fast enough to meet demand. That is not a marketing issue. That is a sovereign supply failure. And the most revealing signal of all is unfolding inside the futures market itself. Traders are refusing to roll forward. They are fighting to stay in delivery months. They want metal now, not promises later. Why? Because they do not trust that the metal will still be there. That is the textbook definition of a squeeze. Shorts are trapped. Longs are demanding delivery. Margins are rising, and it is not working. So what is the verdict on this day? The system fired its biggest financial weapon, and silver is still holding the mid-80s. Governments convened emergency meetings. Retail rationing has begun. Inventories are draining. Today was not about suppressing price. It was about psychology. They wanted fear. They wanted capitulation. They wanted confidence broken. Instead, the market absorbed the hit and stood its ground. That price is not arbitrary. It marks the moment the market collectively understood that paper control no longer overrides physical scarcity. If you already hold physical silver, the message is simple. Do not let rule changes scare you out of the very asset the system itself is scrambling to secure. That metal is not an investment. It is insurance. And if you're still looking to buy, understand the environment has changed. Easy access is over. Availability is tightening. Distribution will not be equal. The technical path forward is clear. The resistance is gone. The test failed to break the market. The gravitational pull is now toward the east. The empire tried to strike back today. It used margins. It used meetings. It used messaging, and it missed.